Good evening, folks. I'm Tom Jacobs. We have a meeting of the Bennington Select Board, and we've been honored to be invited to the Bennington Rescue Squad facility this evening. It's December 19th. It's Tuesday. We also have the distinct pleasure of opening our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance with Girl Scout Troop
30029.
30029 are going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We'll stand and face the flag. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I think we're
Well done. We're going to record that. Much better tape than we normally have.
much better. Much better. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
As I said, I'm Tom Jacobs and have the pleasure of being the chair of the Select Board at this point. I'd like to have my colleagues introduce themselves. Maybe Jean.
Good evening, Jean Connor.
Jim Carroll.
Donald Campbell.
Jeannie Jenkins.
Good evening, Chad Gordon.
And Stuart Hurd.
Stuart Hurd,
Town
and
manager.
Linda Bermudez.
Who cannot get away.
Very last meeting.
Yeah, that's what we keep hearing.
We have a consent agenda that has been circulated. I've had a chance to review the warrants, as I hope others have. We also have the minutes from the December 11th, 2017 meeting, which was held at the Bennington Firehouse. I'll entertain a motion for the acceptance of the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on that? I did see Jerry Bird's was spelled with a B-I-R-D, and I think it's B-Y-R-D.
Oh, I didn't catch that
Yeah.
part. I caught the first name. Okay.
Jerry is.
Yep, okay, and we corrected someone else's name too.
Other than that minor correction, all in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
That's 6 in favor and no abstentions, and the record will indicate that Carson Thurber has indicated that he will not be able to be here tonight. We have a very specific agenda tonight for budget discussion with the Fine Bennington Rescue Squad. Some history on this is last year, the squad visited with the Select Board. It was probably late in the game, as it were, so we really didn't get to discuss very much relative to their financial situation as far as getting them within the budget. The request at that time was, I don't think it was really as certain that was that fair to say. I know we came up, there was a number of $207,000, which was initiated through a petition, which we have, and the squad had the right to do. And in that March town meeting, the electors did authorize that expenditure, but it was not a line item within our ballot. That was a separate petition process. So this year, there's discussion about possibly putting the rescue squad within our budget that is presented, so that there will be no petition if the squad is satisfied with the result of our discussion. Is that a fair? If there's anything else anybody would like to...
Does this become a line item?
It would be, if in fact the board brings them into the budget, it would be much like the Bennington Free Library and the John McCullough Library. It'd be considered an agency within the budget. We would meet probably like this on an annual basis.
Mm-hmm. Just like we do in January with the libraries and invite them in. In this case, we're having this discussion in December to give the board the opportunity, because this is a lot of it's new for the board. The information, financial information has been shared, but I would like to, as we do with all of our line item budget requests, give the rescue squad the opportunity to present the request, and so that we can have a discussion relative to the request and make a determination relative to its request.
I have a
Is that-
question.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. If we were to approve of this tonight, would it then therefore become a line item budget for this coming year, or would it?
Yes.
It would?
Yeah,
Yes.
for July of 1st of 2018.
Okay. But it would be included on the March ballot this year?
It would,
In
yes.
April? or
Yeah,
on-
in March, yeah. Yeah. Any other questions, folks? Because I think that's how I'd like to handle it, and we can decide tonight, too, whether or not you want to have additional information provided, whether or not you think it's appropriate to have enough information to make a motion and discussion and vote on it, or defer that till the next meeting if you feel comfortable or confident in that. So right now, who's going to be leading the discussion?
Citizen comment?
Not till, if you're going to have citizens comment, if you're under other business tonight, we're not having a regular meeting, so if you'd like to sit and listen, we don't have that on our agenda tonight.
This is a regular meeting now?
This is a meeting that's called specifically for this particular purpose, and I don't see that I've made arrangements for citizen comment. However, I will certainly give you the opportunity at the end of this discussion with the rescue squad under other business. Is that fair to you?
Sure.
Because we have some heavy business tonight, maybe even more important than what you're going to want to talk about.
It's a budget.
Okay. So, please, Forrest.
While they're getting settled, we should thank the rescue squad for letting us meet here tonight. Very nice and different space.
Thank you.
And Mike, you should pan around, and do like a little shot of our space.
We did have to make some,
Yeah.
you guys did displace the Girl Scouts.
The Girl
They typically
Scouts?
have this here at 4:30 on Tuesdays, but they were,
Right.
Oh, dear.
that's the reason they happened to be
They've
here.
got another space.
So we accommodated them, so everybody's happy.
Civics 101, right? So priorities already. We really do appreciate it. I was going to echo what Donald was saying, that for you to provide this space for us, and I think it's not a bad idea. We could even do that at the library. I mean, it's nice to see where the town dollars are going, because that's what our responsibility is, to oversee that. So, without further ado, Forrest, why don't you open it up? I think we've got some questions and comments relative to the information that you provided for us.
So thank you guys for all coming out and for continuing this conversation. Tom summarized nicely sort of how we got to here, how we got to today. We did, during our budgeting process in 2016,
Yeah.
417, we had done a really deep dive and sort of looked out to 2020 and looked out to where we needed to be and all the factors in play and all that type of thing, and got us to where we realized that we were not in a sustainable model. At some point, we were going to have a conversation about how can we make this a sustainable model. And and I believe you guys even said when we came to you guys last year, we came early. We weren't like other EMS agencies from semi-regional locations that went to their select board saying we're going to close up shop at the end of this year or something to that effect. We had sort of a few years of leeway, but we wanted to start the conversation, start the dialogue, and have the figure out what data that you guys wanted and what we wanted. Where we got to was that 207, 459, which is the per capita of 1213 a person, to ensure that EMS coverage is available around the clock for the citizens of Bennington. As you guys all know, and have probably read in the banner or seen on Cat TV, we also approached Woodford and Shasberry with those numbers. Basically, same presentation, same conversation, and one of our strategies is make sure that there's also equality amongst the towns. That one town's not necessarily paying more, depending on whatever funding mechanism that we figure out. That we're finding an equal way to do that. So we approached you guys, and we got voted in last year, and I think the conversation now is we're still looking at that same amount, so we're not looking for any increase. We are, as of right now, we're in a holding pattern, as probably a lot of us are, based on federal administration, the status of the Affordable Care Act, the status of where nonprofit donations are going to go in the next few years. All of those are all factors which we haven't necessarily incorporated in because I think it's still too early to do so. But that's sort of where we're at. So as the Affordable Care Act and those types of things are in play right now, the budget and the plan that we had set forward towards 2020 should be fine. Obviously, we'll have to make adjustments as the playing field changes, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. That's all I had because I came and presented to you. It was like a month or two ago, and we gave some data, and As always, we're always open for if there's other data that you guys want. Stu did ask me to fill out the packet, which I believe you guys all got, that you guys do normally for all of your appropriations this year, your new process that you're doing for all of your appropriations. And as always, if there is additional data or anything else that we can provide, relative to any privacy concerns, we will share that and dig down into anything that we can. So, and then I think the last thing, I don't know if you shared with them or not, but Shaftesbury had asked for just some call numbers and some opiate and alcohol numbers as well. And I shared that as well, just to, we pulled it for Shaftesbury, so we went ahead and pulled it for Bennington as well. So with that.
That's a good overview. I think what I'd like to do is, we've all had the opportunity to review the material through 2016. I think we've had audited statements that were provided by you. Obviously, 17 is yet to be completed, right? You've provided a summary of the expenses through 2017 and with anticipation for 2018. Is that accurate for us?
Yes.
The state of 2017, and you're a fiscal year of?
It's a calendar year.
Calendar year.
Yes, sir.
17 is not nailed down yet.
Yeah.
Correct.
So that was basically an estimate based upon your billings and receivables and expenses to date.
Correct.
You also had suggested that there was some capital investments that you're planning on.
So one of the things that we had to do in 2017 is we made no capital purchases in
Noticed
17. So we hit the pause button, and that was a decision made in late 16 when we started really digging into the overall financial structure of, we need to make sure that we're still operating, and have the discussion and figure out what, how quickly do we need to dig into the savings account that we do have. And that's, so as of, for 2017, there's no capital purchases. We're hoping to start that process in 18 and not make sure we don't have the, when I got here, one of the things that happened is, it sounds like a great idea that at a certain point in time, you're like, hey, let's buy 3 ambulances at one time. The only problem with that is that 3 ambulances need replaced at one time. Instead of looking at more of a sequential, let's do 1 a year or 1 every 18 months or something to that effect, to where you can space out the both the cost and the usage.
Do you have a capital reserve line item?
For 18?
Capital expenses?
We don't have a reserve
Yeah.
per se in your sense of the word. We have a depreciation expense that's included
Got it.
in the financial statements.
Yeah.
It's about $90,000. What we have in terms of tentative capital, what did it total to for us? It was over $200,000.
247.
Right.
247.
Also in the budget, I wanted to point out for the group, we do have investment income for the investments that we do have. We're trying to put it on a sustainable basis of withdrawals and start treating it like an endowment, which means it would always be there to help defray some of the costs of the organization. As you're aware of, we had been spending into that hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, way over the investment income. So what you see in the budget and the operating statement is treating it like an endowment. And stuff, we haven't passed a formal investment policy statement, but treating it like an endowment, and that's like a 5% spending policy on the balance.
Because I noticed like $9,000 investment.
Just, Tom.
You introduce.
Linda, do you need his gentleman's name?
Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
I'm Brian Murphy. I'm the Vice Chair of Bennington Rescue Squad. And
Thanks, Brian. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure.
Sorry about that one.
In the 2018 summary, there was a reference to investment income of $9,000, and that's what you're talking about?
No.
Spread? No.
Further down the line, there's another line item for $150,000. The $9,000 is a separate trust that gives a distribution to Bennington
He's
Rescue
here.
Squad.
Where's that?
Back on the front page.
On the cover, on the lead sheet, the investment income used to support operations, that's the endowment draw. The 150.
The 9,000 that you're referencing, Tom, is a
Restricted.
It's a restricted.
It's a trust.
In
It's
looking at the
managed by
previous
someone else.
statements, when we're looking at non-operating income, is that generally the income that you were making?
Correct.
Okay.
But if you start treating it like an endowment, like colleges and universities, and they would actually take the spending policy amount would be moved above as operating income. So every year you could count on, for budget purposes, how much you could draw off of it.
So
So-
does non-operating income include just interest, or is it also a draw against capital?
Non-operating income is the actual income. It would be the income, including the unrealized gains and losses, apart from the 150. So whatever that number is, less 150 is what's non-operating, because that's in there for the long term. And the 150 is appropriated for the current year budget process. And how you spend it with respect to whether it's capital expenditures or in support of operations is up to you. But that's how you would actually treat that in terms of an endowment.
What's the present cap endowment, unrestricted?
The beauty of this is it's almost all unrestricted. It's about $3 million. We wanted to make sure the funding in terms of the towns was solidified before we passed a formal policy. So we're not going into it hundreds of thousands of dollars a year like we had been.
Okay, that's important, because prior to that, not having a policy, you would just invade as
Correct,
needed.
as needed.
Okay, so when I look at these statements that go back to 12 and 11 and whatnot, if I see $200,000 or $300,000 in there, it's not all interest income.
No, it's
a combination of interest income and
Realized and unrealized gains.
realized, unrealized. Okay, so you're pulling from capital at that point.
Correct,
Okay.
correct.
So right now, you have no policy on that. You're talking about seeing where it triggers off or where it goes? Relative to-
Correct. I mean, before we pass a policy, we
Yeah.
make sure that the funding is solidified.
And what's the
Sources.
policy again, just so I can?
Roughly, we were using 5%, and then and we're estimating an average balance of $3 million. Typically, those policies would average the balances out over a number of quarters prior to the start of a year, so that, you can have up years, down years, but the average balance is what you calculate the spending policy on, and that's what's available to support operations. So we're trying to move it in that direction for the long-range sustainability of the squad.
Okay. And because if you look at the marketplace, if you just
Right.
look at it by itself, that's a pretty low return. But you've
Correct.
averaged it over a certain.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
Yeah, okay. So, and using a 5%.
And then the excess above 5%, and some years it will be below that,
Sure.
is retained in the fund to support future operations. But the fund is technically unrestricted, so if there was a need, it's at least available to the squad.
Go ahead. It's,
We probably all have a lot of questions.
Yep, yep.
How do you want to do this?
I think probably just a question in Q&A, because I think you presented what you have here, and then we can now respond to what we already have and with the questions that we've formulated. So why don't we just start? Can I turn to the Vice Chair? Would you like to start? However, it would be unless you have.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
It's great. Thank you for inviting us here, and it's great to be able to have a chance to kind of look at this stuff with you. This was great to have the information. It was difficult to go through. It took quite a few hours to kind of try to get our heads around it. I don't think I quite have it right yet. I think I was thinking that was all interest income. But I took the liberty of summarizing some of your data into sheets that I thought we might be able to understand a little bit more. So I took just the expenses for program and management for 2011 through 16, and the revenue for operating and non-operating during that same period of time, and I graphed it. And I also graphed the endowment as shown in your fair value statement from your.
Sure.
So I'm going to pass this out just to my board members, and again, it's just not. I'm hoping this just makes the conversation a little bit easier. And then the other thing that we're sometimes used to seeing and we'll get better at this as time goes on, because I do think it's good to be working on having this come into our budget. I felt that way last year, and I feel that way again this year. I think the conversation is how can we do that in a way that isn't too hard on our Bennington taxpayers, who are frankly beleaguered right now? And how do we find the right number? So to me, it's more a conversation about, figuring out of all the different agencies and organizations and departments that need funding, which are the ones that are the most needy at this point.
And also, just to add to that, I don't mean to jump on,
Yeah, go.
but the essence of it is, we really need a common template, so everybody reports the same things under the same guidelines, because
Right.
you basically said, here's your financials, go with it. And it's, every agency, every organization seems like they've got a different way. We really need to formalize it, so the information we have is consistent across the board.
So, and kind of with that in mind, I also did a sheet, which is a little bit what we're used to seeing, which is the sort of 2017 next to 2018 and the percent change, so that we can kind of go down the line items and just see where the big increases are and where the decreases are.
Thanks.
And so this is working off of your 2017 budget, which frankly, what you offered us here, the two aren't quite the same. 2017 and 2018 use different line numbers, but so I may not have combined it quite the way you would. And I also took the liberty of adding in the municipal funding, which I don't see recorded in the 2017 summary budget.
Well, the budget was adopted prior to the approval of the funding, because it was already partially through the year. We did not go back and revise the budget at that point in time.
Okay. Yeah, so I don't know what exactly that number was, but I think it was 209,980, if you count Woodford and Shaftesbury and Bennington. Is that, I don't know.
It was
219.
219.
219 total?
Yep.
Okay,
219,
so that's
almost 220.
This is under by 10,000 then. But, so what this helped me look at was what your program expenses have done over the past 6 years, and it doesn't, we're still looking at budget for 17 and 18, but your program expenses, pretty flat, really good in that you've been holding your program expenses down over the years. The management took a bump in 2016, and that your revenues also have been pretty good right up until 2016, when I guess, Forrest, from your presentation, maybe that's when things started to change a little bit with the hospitals, but the operating revenue in 2011 was pretty much the same as the operating revenue in 2016. Program expenses were pretty close between 11 and 16 also. And it also looks like the fair value of your investments has remained pretty constant since from 2011 to 2016, somewhere around 3.4 million. Sometimes over 3.5 million, but that you have an endowment of something in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. And so this graph here, this top line is the endowment, which is board members pretty steady, and then of course the orange line is the revenue line, the blue line is the expense line. So that helped me quite a lot in terms of figuring out how desperate things were. And it actually looks like you've been taking care of things in a pretty good way. It doesn't look that desperate when I look at it this way. It looks like we need to address this, and I'm glad we're talking now. But it looks like your endowment is staying right up there, which is great.
Well, I wanted to point out, and with accolades to the management of the squad, is that you'll notice that the top line is declined, and there's a decline in calls that's going on all over the state, and I don't know if it's all over the country or not, but they've actually worked hard to replace that income so that the deficit doesn't grow here. And the actual management line item that you see showing up in 18 is really costs related to providing services to other EMS agencies.
So the management line is the second one down, right? That
Yes.
starts in 2014. You didn't record a management line
You're on 2
prior
different
to
pages.
that.
You're on 2 different pages.
Which page are you?
He's referring to, I think he was down here.
No, I think we're on the same thing.
Yeah.
We're on the second line of this.
He was on the other sheet.
Oh, I was actually already looking at the detail of this.
He was over in the details, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I just want to make sure we're on.
Okay. Yeah,
Say it again.
so yeah, on this sheet, management doesn't get broken out until 2014.
Right.
So, it looks like you were lumping through 2013, and then starting in 2014, you broke it out. Still, your total expenses, though, look pretty good, somewhere between 2 million and 2.2 million,
Right.
kind of somewhere in that range for that whole time period, so pretty steady. And revenue also, I think I've made a mistake here because my bottom line was what you put in as non-operating. I thought that was all interest on investments, but I realize that some of that is draw on investments now, so.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So,
And actually, we would change the financial statements that you would see. It would be non-operating, and then the piece that is appropriated for the annual budget would come up into operating income if we actually adopted a policy, which is what we're hoping to do.
I do feel a little bit like, part of why I felt like I had to do this was I couldn't see where the return on your investments was showing up in these pages. And you have some significant investments, and I couldn't see that they were all accounted for in your 17 and 18 budgets.
Well, that's why we've also put in the 150, because really the gains, I mean, the market could go down. I mean, it's actually, from dealing with the investment managers at the college that manage the Bennington College's endowment, the U.S. markets are considered overvalued at this point in time. So there could be a fall coming at any time. But nonetheless, even if there were, if you had a policy, you'd always know what would be appropriated for the next year so that you could base your budget upon it. So that's where we're trying to move to that direction.
We're hedging against the potential.
Yeah.
And
Right.
before that.
And that's why you average it out over an extended period of time.
But you could have had a really good gain this year. With the
Yes,
stock market the way it's
yes.
been, you could.
Possibly, non-operating, yes.
Right.
That's what if you took that snapshot, Ryan, the public would say, oh, $3.5 million income, great market this year. You're asking the taxpayer for $200,000. If you took that in isolation, you'd say, well, why are you asking for that much year in and year out, potentially? And your response to that is, maybe you're repeating what you just said.
Well, we slashed capital expenditures to nothing last year because we realized it wasn't a sustainable model. It's only allowed us, the stability of having some funding allowed us to have the confidence to start planning. We haven't placed the order for that, but literally this is a service that requires up-to-date equipment. And in fact, as you can tell, the way it's managed expenses in the past, and this is before my going on the board, is they had cut costs, even though salaries and other expenses had grown, they had actually cut costs. And the determination was, well, we just can't do that anymore because you're endangering the public at that point in time. So if we go back to that, yes, we could spend all the gains in equipment, and it's just not a sustainable model. That's getting into drawing against the endowment, what little endowment this place has, to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And now the equipment's getting old, but there's already 200,000, and that's just trying to update, because I think that capital expenditures have been slashed for a number of years, actually, here.
Going back to the hedge question or the
Right.
discussion, you think Forrest warned us? That was what you were talking with us last August, I think, September, actually 2016.
Yes.
2016, that, yeah, you could continue to invade the endowment, but 5 years out, if you continued at that pace or that rate, you're going to be in.
Because we were pulling, to maintain capital expenditures and to maintain operations, and you're looking at $500,000 or $600,000 a year just to get back to zero. And a $3 million investment doesn't sustain that type of hit for more than just a few years.
I don't see your endowment going down, though. I mean, it looks like it's been staying above, between kind of 3 to 3.5 for 6 or 7 years.
Even in that 2016.
It's done well investments. This is before I was on board, but it's been an extraordinary run since 2011 in terms of the U.S. equity markets in which this is concentrated. So it's just, you're looking at a snapshot of particularly good years in the history of the U.S. stock market, post-recession, which has actually helped sustain this during some very difficult times, obviously. So they've taken all the gains basically off of it to support operations all those years, whereas a lot of endowments actually grew significantly over that same time period.
And you'd mentioned that your calls, I don't think your calls so much have gone down, it's just your reimbursement levels have gone
It's a
down.
combination of both. So, and Bill Camardo is our Director of Operations, he's behind me, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, if we need
He's looking
additional
right
data. But our 911, actually, is it okay if I just bring him up?
Yeah, that's probably good.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, this is, yeah.
Bill Camardo
Yeah.
is our
Yeah.
Director of Operations.
Did you get that, Linda? Great. Pull up a chair.
Just to talk about
It's your place.
911 and transport volume.
So maybe we just talk about, the reimbursement levels and the impact that it's having on your operation, financial operation.
So the first thing I'll hit on is volume, and I'll let him hit on volume for just a second.
In terms of emergency calls, we've gone basically plus or minus about 5% any given year, around a pretty steady baseline. This year, we're projected to be up about 1.7% of 911 calls in the town of Bennington, which is within the normal margin of deviation there. Our transport percentages remain pretty steady, around 72-73% of those emergency calls result in a transport. The main volume that we've had that has fluctuated this year has been our transfer volume. Specifically, the hospital has been utilizing some out-of-state services that don't have to comply with the same regulation levels we do in the state of Vermont. So they're a bit more freer to do things that our crews could certainly do, but it is a lot more difficult for us to achieve the level of regulation the state has put upon us.
What's that percentage of impact relative year to year?
We are down about 15% on our transfer volume this year.
So that's a state regulation that is,
So there's a state regulation specifically for what they call the critical care paramedic level of service. So paramedics have a basic formulary of medications and procedures that they do. In other states, they provide minimal or even no transport training to do the higher level of care, and then are certified as critical care services. Here in the state of Vermont, you have to achieve a special additional level of certification, which typically takes either 2 weeks full-time, or you have to study for a nationwide certification exam, which most people struggle with. We are lucky that we have now 4 critical care paramedics on staff. That still doesn't provide us with 24/7 coverage when we're talking about competing with other services. So the hospital will frequently call other services that aren't providing necessarily the same level of care that we do provide here, but we're inhibited by the state of Vermont Department of Health regulations of what we're permitted to transfer.
so just to make clear to me and then the viewing public, this is not a hospital, and we talked about it, I think the last time we met, and I really found it astounding that the Bennington Rescue Squad, especially upon the returning of a patient to their home environment, is determined by the state rather than the hospital?
It's a combination of both. So we also...
So it would, at the behest of the hospital, that could be changed? And
Some
have you
of-
made any efforts to change that?
Some of it could be changed. So we're talking about 2 kind of separate issues. There's the regulatory issue, so certain calls we can't take that another service that has the same level of training, if not lower than us, can go and take because they're not regulated by the state of Vermont. They can just come pick up calls as long as it's not an emergency. They can come pick up calls even at the hospital and take them anywhere
Can they-
without having to comply with any Vermont regulations. But
Even
as a
within the
Vermont
state?
service, we have to
Within the
comply.
state?
Yes, sir. Is that?
That doesn't make a lot of sense, that it's within, they're
This
not
this issue
regulated.
the squad brings up on an ongoing basis. with
To
the
whom?
hospital.
Legislature.
To both the hospital and to the Vermont Department of Health. It puts us at a competitive disadvantage when we're trying to provide service to our own residents, to take them somewhere else. that we're not permitted to do so if we don't have a certain special level of certification on duty. Likewise, though, the hospital does have days where they utilize other services as the first call. On Tuesdays, for example, we don't have the same level of staffing we would have on other days on a Tuesday because they call another service first all day, regardless of where you live. So if you're a town of Bennington resident and you need to go to a nursing home, for example, for some rehabilitation or long-term care, they will call this other service that comes from another town to come pick you up as a town of Bennington resident and take you to a nursing home in Bennington without calling Bennington resident.
So if they're-
Before you go.
Okay.
So if I'm in the hospital and I'm going to be transferred to CLR, which is all of 102 yards,
Yes.
they could call some squad that's outside of the region.
Correct.
That's ridiculous.
And if it's Tuesday, they will call.
Have you made any efforts to,
Absolutely.
well, if
Many, many times.
Okay. Well, that's maybe for another day, but it certainly impacts the discussion. But
It really is, it's got to be a significant loss in revenue. If somebody is coming from Wallingford or Manchester, just to transport them 200, 300 yards to CLR, and you're not seeing any of it, when it would be much more cost-effective if we got that, I think anybody viewing this would find that absolutely ridiculous.
And what does count, though, and it's part of the message that we need to get out as an organization, but we also need help getting that message out, is as a resident of the town of Bennington, you have a choice. You can ask for the hospital to call the ambulance service of your choice instead of whoever they decide to call that day. You can say that you would like Bennington Rescue, but that requires you in a time when you're sick and trying to recuperate to try and remember that fact that you do have a choice in your care provider, just like you would in a doctor.
Do you have any recommendations on who we might talk to at the hospital?
I think Forrest.
Regarding this?
We have ongoing conversations with the folks at the hospital, and we are trying to move the conversation to the patient choice aspect, just like what Bill was saying, as far as you have a certain orthopedist that you want to go to, that when EMS transport is needed, the first question shouldn't be what day of the week is it, but do you have a preference? Do you have a preference in your care? And that's sort of where we're driving the conversation, because frankly, there could be some folks that don't live in Bennington that don't want us, and that's totally fine, because it's, we are patient champions, and that's.
If you're a resident of Wilmington and you would like Deerfield Valley Rescue to come and pick you up, I would totally embrace that kind of care and that kind of choice on the patient's side. And I think our whole organization would. I don't want to speak for the whole organization, but that's how I would feel as a resident. I'm a town of Bennington resident, and I would like Bennington Rescue to come pick me up and take me somewhere if I need to go. Mainly because I also know the level of quality of care and the great job that our great crew does.
And I think it's important, but it's probably not the echoing message that we want to spend a lot of time on tonight, but I think that's certainly impacts relative to the 15% diminution of your income over, I mean, that translates to some dollars.
Yeah, so if you think about it, a strictly 911 service, so where the non-emergency business helps an agency like us is that, and a town doesn't need, you don't ever need exactly one ambulance or two ambulances or three ambulances, depending on the time of day or day of week or whenever that hits. Bill has a phenomenal, he measures our data and the demand, and we staff right to that. The thing is that, if you need 1.3 ambulances, we can't staff one ambulance. It's binary, it's one or two. So where that non-emergency business becomes very important to our bottom line and to our operations is that other period of time, if we have the ability to move patients and provide that care, that helps offset the costs of providing the service.
So this transfer of patients from other areas, what's the loss in, do you have a general idea of what the loss in revenue is for you folks?
It's probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollars based on our.
Yeah,
I think there's also a couple other components in there as well, Jim. That.
But what would be the percentage? Right now, you said that that it's costing you 15%. Is that right?
That was in call volume. It's really based on payer mix. I could dig into those numbers. I can't give you exact numbers right off the top of my head.
Maybe it's worth probably staying up at a little, higher level, because it feels to me like we don't want you out competing other ambulance services that other communities need. Okay, so we don't want it to be a competition. We want it to work better together. We want everybody in Vermont to have good service. We don't want Bennington to win and Arlington to lose, or something like that. So I think we're in a time for transition. I predict, I don't know much about this, but I bet in 5 years things are going to be very different. I bet mergers are going to happen. I bet you're going to work with a hospital. I bet a lot of things are going to be different in 5 years. But right now you're in a lot of transition, and so you're having to worry about things like, well, ask people to ask for our service because we need to get paid for it, and hopefully that won't go on for too much longer, because it feels to me like if you take the statewide perspective, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So. It's a good point, Jim, but I also feel like at some level we need all these emergency rescue services to be available to us. Whether or not they all need to be independent, I think, is a bigger and separate question that we shouldn't go into.
I agree with you up to a point, Donald. Here's where I disagree. When the town is on the hook for $200,000, and if we were able to make deliveries from our rescue squads, instead of, I think, if Wallingford or Wilmington is bringing their patients here, who can argue with that? But on the return, when we could be making up for this loss of revenue on your part, and diminish that $200,000 that the people of Bennington have agreed to give you, and in a significant way, and you said yourself, it could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we're not getting.
Potentially, yes.
I think that's an idea that absolutely demands being pursued.
One of the things, Donald, on your, and I'll just make it open record, we do work with the hospital on a lot of things. Conversation, please don't act like there's not a relationship there. We work with from senior management down to clinical floor staff on a variety of issues, from the community care team to transitional care nursing, falls prevention, trauma programs and stroke programs, and a ton of those things happen frequently, and we're very much in a lot of those conversations.
But the ambulance issue has been going on as a topic of conversation for years. It's been a very difficult. That's right. And I find it incredible as a citizen of Vermont that an out-of-state agency can be called to pick somebody up that's a Bennington resident and take them home in Bennington rather than the Bennington Rescue Squad. It's really...
I get that.
Yeah, it gets under the skin of everybody on the board.
I get that.
Yeah. Go ahead. I think we should continue to talk about.
Is it possible to dig into the specific numbers? So one of the great pleasures of ever conceiving of coming into the budget is that we really get to look in the underwear drawer a little bit, and kind of look at the actual numbers and then kind of pick on them a little bit. And that's why I thought this sheet might help our board a little bit. So, when I look at these numbers, it looks like, if I was to sort of summarize, I would say that you're seeing a drop in billing revenue. That's sort of a notable number that jumps out. There's I don't know what this is, but between 2017 and 2018, there's a $106,000 increase to income from management services.
Well, that's what I was referring to.
Is that
I was already
billing?
down in the squad started doing services to help defray some of this cost to other towns and EMS agencies.
Yeah.
So you want to describe that a little bit for us?
I can't get into a ton of detail because some of it is still
Proprietary and
yes, but there are agencies. And when we start talking about agencies working together, you're right on point. There are agencies around us that the business of running an EMS agency. I think a lot of folks, back in the day, 20, 30 years ago, where you can come in and run a call and go home and do that once or twice a week, that was fun and exciting. When you start to get into the thing of running a business, it becomes, as all of us that work in business and management know, that there's a lot of stuff under the hood that has to happen. And there are agencies around us that have started to realize that they just want to come and run calls, or they want to be more on the emergency, or deal with that kind of stuff. And certain aspects, like, I'm going to use a for instance here, like HR processes or billing processes or fleet services or whatever, those services can be provided by an outside vendor. And sometimes agencies will hire someone to come in and provide those services, especially someone that has industry knowledge. So as an addition, there's that's hopefully that's vague enough, but also specific enough that you can kind of understand where that's coming
So
from.
that 106,000 in income would be coming from helping other
And the next line.
other entities.
So it's
And-
187,000.
Okay, and the other one's a big jump too,
95.
right? Staffing services, so those are both
Correct.
new services that you would provide other agencies, which
Correct.
is great, very supportive of that. And then, is that offset by, in expenses, management and staffing, there's a huge increase of $162,000 there?
Yeah, if you actually, yeah.
Yeah, that's the cost associated with that. And some of
Okay.
that is the time, for example, Bill's time.
Yeah.
The time is tracked, so it's actually helping to cover the overhead of this squad
Yeah.
to be doing this. So, but they need to track that for tax reasons, in reporting it out. So you can see that there's some margin there, but it's actually helping to cover the overhead of this agency to the benefit of the taxpayers.
I see, because Bill does other things besides
Correct.
the billing and, okay. So the 162,000 is what it's costing to do those additional services, and the 181,000 is what is being made. So the net positive, a little bit,
It's a little bit.
but mostly it's a way of covering necessary
Right.
administrative services.
And addressing the decline in billing revenue.
Yeah.
Were you-
I think we've realized too, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to ask if you were able to add staff. Like, are we creating a new position, or are we adding more
This
hours
time,
to
no,
part-timers?
We were filling a vacant position, but it's one of those things where we realize, sorry, I will answer a different question, Chad. We have folks that are specialized in those categories. So one of the things that using the analogy I was telling Don, instead of paying, let's imagine XYZ EMS agency hires an executive director for, X dollars. Instead, they're going to pay us a fee. And instead of getting one person, they're getting a team of individuals that have specialized knowledge that then can help provide that. And we become better in our jobs and more proficient because we're focusing on those, and then that agency gets that benefit. The other thing I was going to tell you, Donald, is we had to think long and hard about going into this realm, but the little bit of margin is one of those things where we realize there's not necessarily a silver bullet to fix this, but if we can make gains in a whole bunch
20,000
of
here and 10,000 there.
yeah, so we'll start chipping into that. So there's that's sort of the
Well, and for people who are looking at these numbers, it looks like you have an almost $300,000 increase in operations, staffing, and administration, if you add those first three numbers. But if you then kind of back out the fact that 162,000 of that is helping make the management and staffing services, then it looks a lot better. It still looks like you have about $130,000 increase in operation expenses next year.
Is that related to additional employees coming on, or
that's probably
this is operation expense?
I just took these numbers out of your budgets, so I didn't.
These lines.
and I'm trying to cue my brain of where that the stuff is feeding into them from our actual budget. I think we did add a few more benefited positions.
Benefits eligible.
Benefit eligible, I'm sorry.
So you added benefits to existing positions.
Benefited position. So one of the things that we had, one of the things in the underwear drawer here of Bennington Rescue is that this agency has lived for a long time on us having a sort of well, when we got here, a small full-time staff, and then a really, really large part-time staff. And that was sustainable for a really long time. The thing is that folks have other jobs, and it's hard to sort of keep that up. So over the last few years, we've been adding a couple benefit positions, every year as much as possible. We're at the point now where we're sort of at walking right down the fence line of having, we don't have enough benefited positions as far as being able to offer medical, dental, all that type of thing, vacation. And we still rely heavily on per diem staff. But that's coming to an end at some point. One of the problems we have here now is that, and we can talk about it in depth, is that it's really hard to recruit staff. We've basically shaken every tree within, 30 to 50 miles of here, trying to get good providers to come in. And where the problem with that is that occasionally we'll have someone apply, we don't have a full-time gig for them. We can come in and say, yes, we really need a paramedic, come work for us. We can guarantee you 12 hours a month, and when a position comes open, we'll give you a benefited position. But you kind of have to wait for attrition or someone to move on or something to that effect, which makes it really hard then on the recruitment side. So, we talk about all the time, like, where do the volunteers go? I would take volunteers in a heartbeat, but we can't necessarily even fill the open positions that we have now, or some of the per diem positions that we have, and we don't necessarily have enough full-time spots to even meet the need on the day-to-day basis of covering those hours. So at a certain point in time, when those per diem folks dry up, then the conversation will be, how many more full-time folks can we add?
So recruitment is a concern issue relative to, now, do you work with like colleges or the hospital to try to
Absolutely
create that situation that?
So I'll answer your question in two parts. The first is that because we are an ALS providing agency in Southwest Vermont, there's not a ton. First of all, Vermont just finally graduated. I think there are 2 or 3 of the first paramedics they've ever graduated. So paramedics in Vermont have always been imports.
Mm-hmm. Where are they graduating from?
Vermont Tech is the. They used to have a Bennington program, and that's not.
ALS is Advanced Life Support.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. But being in Southwest Vermont, one of the things that we've, like I said, we've reached out, and people don't necessarily travel really far distances to come work an EMS job, and we have tapped out the Vermont market. So we're competing with Northwest Massachusetts and the Albany area. I can tell you right now that a paramedic salary in Vermont compared to a paramedic salary in Albany are in 2 different atmospheres. And so for us to say, hey, come to Bennington and make $18 an hour, and they're like, well, I'm making 27, 28 in Albany. I'm not pulling anyone over here. So that's as far as the paramedic side. And then what was the other question? What was your initial question?
You got it. I think you got benefits, you got more full-time employees and fewer part-time.
where they're
So you
coming
have increased benefits costs from that. And then you probably are having to pay more, it sounds like. So that $102,000 increase in 1 year gets my attention,
Sure.
If Stuart brought that to us, I'd want to know exactly why he was, bringing us a $100,000 increase. And I guess that's what I was wondering about a little bit on the operations side. But it sounds like you've between those 2 things, between additional benefits and between moving to maybe some higher salaries to try to be more effective at recruiting. Is that?
There has been they're fairly modest increases, but I think the majority of the shift would have been from part-time. The hours didn't change in terms of the staffing, but they were converted into positions with benefits.
I'm sorry. I feel like I'm taking up too much air.
No,
It's
because
fine,
this is
your
good because we're going to be going down the.
The questions are good.
Well, it's on the positive side, it's really nice. I don't know how you did it, but your facilities and maintenance and your vehicles line item budgets are both down significantly over last year. So I don't know if maybe it's because you're not needing to spend as much money. But those are the facilities and maintenance is cut in half. So it's a nice savings. I'm not sure where that comes from. But.
There was some insurance. The insurance was several different types of insurance was bid out. So there's savings embedded in these numbers from renewals that came in cheaper than in the prior year.
But you're also impacted by workers' comp in a big way, I expect. And that's
We're still waiting to see the effects of the presumption. So last year, the legislature passed a presumption bill which says that if you have any EMS, police, or fire agency, so the town also is aware of this,
Yes.
Yeah.
that if you develop symptoms of PTSD, that the EMS agency it's presumed that you got it through your EMS employment. And it is in effect for 3 years after you leave the agency. So if Bill stops working for us tomorrow, 2.5 years from now, if he develops symptoms of PTSD, that's a workers' comp hit on us. We don't know the effect of that yet. And then also buried in there as well is the lovely Vermont provider tax.
Oh, yes.
So that is the tax that the Bennington delegation didn't vote for it, but it's I call it probably incorrectly, the Vermont federal money laundering scheme, where they tax their EMS agencies and put it all into a pool and then try to give us better rates when they pay us their Medicaid money. Hospitals and other folks do it, but 2 years ago the Vermont legislature put that in as an additional expense for us.
So I guess my last point on this, the numbers, it seemed like if once you add the municipal funding in, that if you were on budget this year, you would actually have a net increase or a net positive of $62,991 because I missed $10,000 in the municipal funding.
Yeah.
So that you would not be working in a deficit, you'd be working with $62,000 overage. But the next year, even with the municipal funding, it looks like you, according to your budget numbers, you'd be working in a deficit of $144,000
Right.
roughly. So does that seem right? Again, I took these directly from your 2017 and 2018 budget numbers. So I'm not sure. If it is right, I guess I would continue to worry about the $144,000 deficit in your budget for 2018.
Which actually, the operating lines, that's why we had the lead sheet, doesn't have the estimated $150,000.
Carol from.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So that was, that actually, within that level of funding, just got us back to a balanced budget without consideration of capital expenditures, and we still have a couple $100,000 worth of capital expenditures that need to be carefully considered.
And what would be the contribution, or what would be the increase in the endowment if you drew $150,000 off, approximately?
I don't have the numbers in front
Yeah,
of me.
a couple $100,000, $100,000?
I don't know if it's that much. Do you know offhand from the statements?
It looked like you were making something like a couple $100,000 a year in interest income, but is that?
Yeah,
Reading
but I
those
mean, this has been a
statements
particularly good year.
Yeah, yeah.
So it might be a little bit more than that,
Mhm.
but then it's not all in equities, of course. So I don't have those numbers at the top of my head.
But that's the benefit of this new policy
Right.
that will take
Well,
place,
and
so
part
you'll
of the
be
fear
having
is
more
you could
stable.
spend that down, obviously,
Yeah.
but then think of what the taxpayers would have to absorb later on at one time if there is, because the other towns in the area that receive public support are at actually a much higher rate, and that's because they never developed an endowment, I surmise, as part of the issue. But their rates of support from their towns is much, much higher than what we're asking for. And that's the fear, that if you spend that down, that's what would happen.
Yeah. Now, we're knowledgeable about other, impacts of endowments being so invaded without a plan, because obviously, if the things go south with the federal, the stock market has a difficult year, you want to be able to weather that without having significant impacts.
It would be nice if the taxpayer had the upside of that, though. It's just saying, okay, so
That's-
right now, if there's an upside, it goes to your endowment. If there was a way that, if you're expecting $200,000 of interest income, and we're paying $200,000, if you get $400,000 of interest income, it'd be nice to let the taxpayers off the hook that year.
But then there's no increase, because then you'd actually have to draw down from the endowment.
No, I mean, I'm
It's just the income.
Just off the interest income.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I'm saying, I
Well,
agree to the endowment
It's
should
not
stay
interest
steady.
income, it's realized gains and
Realized
losses.
gains, yeah.
It's the whole pot.
Yeah.
So it's not, so when you say that gain, we're thinking of a gain in the balance, which has got income, investment income, gains, losses. So it's all in there.
Yeah, so in your, yeah, money market funds and mutual funds and
Right. Like
yeah.
bond funds.
Beneficial interest funds, all of those things, if they see a big increase,
And there's a more than to cover that spread. If it's 400 and when you needed 200, that 400 would be somehow benefiting the.
right, I mean, I guess I'm wondering, is there some way that the town could endorse a certain kind of return, to keep your endowment where it is? But on the really good years, on the really good years in the market,
What
maybe we
happens
give
in
the
the bad
taxpayers a
years?
break.
That's
The town
subsidized.
has to endorse it. So in the years when, you make zero on your fund, then the town has to step
Well,
in.
see, if you actually treat it like an endowment fund, and then you have that draw, the averaging of that over time is what makes sense, and it makes it more sustainable. It would be very difficult, that's why you average it out over a longer period in time. It sounds good, but then the organization is subject to the vagaries every year about, well, does the town actually have money if you had a really bad year to make that up? It may come at a really bad time for the town. So,
Yeah, I see that point.
Yeah.
I see that point. We could have some high and low swings that could be
Right.
really hard for us to manage.
And the low here could be at the same time as the town is having a particularly difficult time. And the thing is, you could theoretically spend down the endowment, but then the hit to the taxpayers at the end of the day, I think it was Manchester at $30 a head.
2720, they just went down a little bit because they came up with a really creative, complex way to keep track,
Right.
for EMS funding, which saved them about 50 cents somehow in their per capita, but it made the calculation a lot
What's their
more
per capita in Manchester, just by?
It's $27,
Yeah.
but it is $27.67.
Yeah.
The
What's Deerfield Valley? Do you know that one?
that I do not know.
Okay.
The Manchester they got all their towns involved, and all the towns were already supporting them anyway. But what they did is they went into sort of a base number with the number of calls, and then based on a certain percentage on
Capital expenditures.
capital expenditures. But at the end of the day, they moved the needle, so like all the towns end up paying the same money, but now there's like a lot harder way to get there.
It's, if I recall correctly, I think they were doing, because the equipment had to be available for all, they were doing that piece of the funding based on population. The operations they were doing based on call volume from the different districts being served. So it ended up being fairly negligible in the total, but there could have been some swings for the individual towns along the way. But it seemed very complex for what it was.
I don't mean to press on this, but
No, please do.
But not to put too fine a point on it, but we're going to be making very difficult financial decisions among competing interests. And there's a very real possibility that we could be putting in excess of a couple $100,000 to you this year, in a year, when you're growing your endowment. And we could also be looking at the North Bennington Library or something like that, that has no more endowment, and they need money too, so we're in a situation where I think we have to kind of know, we have to be aware of what's happening to your endowment, because that's a, we don't want to feather the nest,
I don't get the statements. I'm actually just on the board. So,
Yeah.
Forrest, you want to go grab the statement?
Well,
No, I don't mean to-
No, we understand.
I more mean-
Yeah, it's how it's used.
we need to be conscious of the fact that you have an endowment. We need to be supportive of the fact that you have financial responsibility. You've been responsibly managing it, and therefore you have this endowment. And we're not asking you to draw that down, but I think we also have to be careful that if it looks like it's growing very much, how do we compare that to the other needs of the town that are quite acute?
The one thing I'll add to that is, I don't disagree, and I think that all the folks for appropriation, everything the town does is awesome, and I think it's great services. However, I do believe that your police, fire, and EMS services, that we're always here.
Yeah.
And that when XYZ shelter is closed or something else happens, or, great example, the 12,000 people that come to Garlic Fest, probably aren't going to check out a book from the library. But if they get into a wreck pulling out of the parking lot, that's going to hit on all of your essential services. So I think that when you start to look at, essential and where priorities lie, I think we keep that in the back of your mind as well.
I think it's
Very good
it's a very
point.
good, a good point.
I agree.
The other part of it is that we have a challenge that we look at an organization that's taking affirmative steps to protect the assets that it has, so that when things are tough, you're not going to be coming screaming to the town for $400,000 to just stay operational. The challenge that we have is, what is the least you need this year realistically under the context of your endowment to provide the services to the level that you need to do. And if you say it's 209 and that's it, then I think we have to look at the whole picture, including the endowment presently, absent the plan for the policy, which I think is a great one. So
We have to take into account the fact that, there's big hits coming from the education side of things. So
Yeah, that's-
taxpayers are going to be hurting this year.
crazy.
And we have to really take that into account, I think. So gradual moves. I've always been more in favor of gradual moves. I'd love to take.
we've been monopolized.
I'm sorry, yeah, I'm not going to say anything
No,
else.
no, I'm saying,
No.
it's been good questions, but I think,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Don took a lot of my questions, and I think you guys answered some of them. I want to commend you guys looking over this report, looking at salaries back in 2013. It's like, I'm just going through it again. Salaries actually have gone down. Your total expenditure in salaries I know is tough, every year. Looking at your 2016 salary and wages line versus 2013 it's not a lot down, but it's close, and that's tough over that time to keep that up. And then looking at the first sheet we had, I guess the only question I saw was salary and wages. Let me get back to it, sorry. On the summary budget sheet, comparing the one for the town, sorry. The first one, comparing salary and benefits totaled, it was like an $80,000 increase. I'm assuming that has to do with benefit increases. It's like 6% is what I saw from the 18 to 19. I didn't know if they had a breakout for that year and those comparisons.
Where are you at, Chad?
The Town of Bennington funding application page, it's like the third thing.
202.
Yeah, I just lost it too.
Oh, this thing here?
Yes, thank you. The third line. Because on all the previous, they had salaries and wages as one line item, and then benefits as another, unless I'm reading it wrong in here. So the fiscal year 2018 current, and then 2019, just roughly it's an $80,000 increase. So I was like, oh, it's like 6%. And then past year's salaries have been staying relatively flat, so I didn't know if that was all on benefits. Or if there was an individual breakout. I assumed it was benefits and just I guess I was looking for
It's probably a combination of benefits, and we also filled a vacant position.
Okay.
Couple.
You did say that, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. That was it. Don answered the rest of my questions.
I think the only question I have is in just thinking about the endowment, when you think about where you would like your endowment to sit in terms of amount, are you at it? Are you hoping to be at 400?
Well, please feel free to chime in. I just tend to know more about that.
Yeah.
At a 5% spending policy, over the course of time, it would have very slow accumulation, because it's expected that you would probably have, with a balanced portfolio like that, the expected return over a longer period of time would be something on the order of 7% per year. Now, we've had a few good years, but the long-term appreciation on an annual basis would be around 7%. So you're taking 5% of that out. So actually, it's really a steady state. Using a 5% spending policy is a steady state. If you went lower in the spending policy, which some schools have done, but you've got to be able to afford it, that actually can preserve the endowment and let it grow a little faster, but it would not grow very fast at a 5% spending policy, which is what, frankly, with the tension between the endowment needs and desire to grow it plus the taxpayer needs, that's personally, and the board hasn't approved anything, but I think you're talking about a 5% rate feels about right. So it's basically preserving the endowment and not a lot of growth.
And the reason that you want to keep the endowment at this amount is because you want,
It's an unrestricted reserve because if there was something, there's been a lot of turmoil in the EMS world. And frankly, what happened is the insurance world, you guys have heard this in other presentations, but the insurance model that everybody used, that used to pay for the EMS services, no longer works. Medicaid and Medicare reimbursements do not pay for the fair cost of the service. And that is 75% of the business. So the fact of the matter is the model's broken. So it does, if you have them, it would warrant trying to preserve those reserves for unintended consequences, I think, in the market because there's such turmoil. I do think there'll be times when there'll be drawdowns beyond what the spending policy is. Fortunately, it's actually not technically restricted, so that could happen. But
Can I just ask for a clarification? I'm really confused about endowment and then the statement that's in here, which says it's permanently restricted. And now you're talking about.
that's a little piece of it, just a tiny piece of it,
178,000,
Yeah.
just a little chunk.
just a little chunk.
Income only.
Okay, I
Just
just
a
wanted to
little chunk.
clarify
The vast
that.
majority of it is unrestricted.
Good.
Is, the vast majority is restricted or
Yeah,
unrestricted?
You could spend it any way they want.
Right.
Okay.
But then again, at the end of the day, if that's spent down, you guys probably, from what you're saying, have encountered situations where that's occurred, then it becomes a real drain on an annual basis on the taxpayers, so. And I think they've done a good job, obviously, in terms of trying to mitigate what have been already dynamics in the revenue, of declining revenue, by trying to offset that with new revenues for the squad.
Probably would help us to have, to ask on this, if going forward, to ask on this sheet for information about the endowment. I guess we'd get it in the financials, we'd continue to get it in the financials, so we'd be able to know what your endowment was doing on a year-to-year basis. So if you do have a banner year and you make $500,000 this year, we might take that into account, when we're kind of thinking about the line.
Notwithstanding a policy that suggests.
Yeah.
Good point. Go ahead.
I'm concerned, like you said, you have a banner year, and we take that into consideration. What if they have a poor year, are we going to take that into consideration and give them more? I mean, I kind of look at it as like I pay my oil bill, I pay it the same way every year. I win some years, I lose some years. I guess that was kind of what you were trying to say earlier,
Yeah,
right?
that's my concern.
That's
Those bad years in the stock market could coincide with a really horrible year budgetarily for the
Then you
town.
lose part of your endowment.
Well, so, but, he's talking about a 5% draw, which what they're asking us is well more than 5%.
Yeah.
The other, Jeannie, I didn't want to.
No, that's fine.
Don, do you want to follow up? And then keep going right down.
Just, I guess pushing a little bit, I like the oil analogy too.
I always
a little
lose.
bit. That 1 year was terrible.
Yeah, I know. I think I was heating my neighbor's house.
That 1 year was really bad. But what I'm trying to get at is sort of what, if 150,000 is what they're looking at, that's the sort of 5% on 3 million. And arguably the number's a little higher than that. But if, the town.
I'm including some averaging there too, because
Yeah.
you should have a policy that averages out over time. So I don't know what those numbers would be, so that was an estimate pending, but of course that was pending knowing what would happen in terms of town funding as well, because that might be out the window.
So I guess the flat payment thing works, so, for a for-profit business. Is that the way we want to do it with the taxpayers? I'm just not sure.
It's a Russian roulette, just that's your point. But
It's complicated.
Yeah,
No doubt.
and it's interesting because last year, the 209,000, or
207,
207, thanks, I should know that better too. But you also use investment income to support operations in the tune of 339, right? I mean, that's just to balance your books, right? 339,000
Right.
was used. So that's including the $207,000.
Yeah, we still have skin in the game on our side, so we still are working. We still have, I think we have came a long way on both the income generation side and on the revenue, or excuse me, on the expense reduction, as apparent in the financial statements. We still have, I won't say a ways to go, but there are still gains that we're in the process of finding. You know, when you mentioned the 2013, one of the things that this squad used to do is anytime there was a problem, we were throwing money at the problem. So we had ambulances on duty, ridiculous. If you guys needed an ambulance at any time, day or night, and you and 6 of your friends needed an ambulance, we probably had it staffed. You know, now we're down to the point of realizing our demand and staffing right at that demand. You know, which also puts us at a very, you will see other ambulances in town sometimes because,
Right.
if it's a Tuesday afternoon and 5 people call, for an ambulance, you're probably not going to get us just because, our bench is only so deep.
So does that lead to friction with the providers and the other ambulance services?
Yes and no. We have a pretty good collegial relationship with the other EMS agencies.
Okay.
I say for the most part. I mean, there's always going to be one-offs, and if we have a typically busy day and they end up in town a couple times, we try to cover all of our own stuff. And it works both ways as well. As you guys hear us occasionally going to Pownell or Arlington or Hoosick to help out our neighbors, it happens.
I think it goes to Donald's. At some point, there's got to be more consolidation, merger, and a different umbrella than we have right now. And I think we're working towards that and trying to finance getting there. That's the real challenge. Sorry.
So just to be clear, the $207,000 that you're requesting from the town that you've been granted is to cover general expenses. There's no great specificity with how that money is spent?
General operations, yes.
Stu, when operations or individuals are requesting a large amount of money, we've asked for specifics with regard to salaries. Is that correct?
I dare say we probably haven't
We have
asked
not.
for that kind of specifics.
We're glad to provide that, though.
I think the townspeople of Bennington deserve it. But I want to hammer again the point, and I think that we as the select board have a fiduciary responsibility to the people of Bennington to know where the money is being spent and how it is. And if there is a possible solution in the realm of hundreds of thousands of dollars that could absolutely obviate this request on an annual basis, it should be explored. I think we as a board should do it and take every measure possible so that the town of Bennington will not have to be on the hook for this on a yearly basis, and with a fluctuation in the stock market. If your endowment tanks and the requests go up, when we have this opportunity to address it, to get that money and bill appropriately, we owe it to the people of Bennington.
Thanks, Jim.
Well, I'd like to have a little discussion on that. Do you agree with that or not?
I think that's what we've been sitting here for the last hour doing.
No, we haven't discussed this specifically with respect to not billing.
Respect to
Not
the billing?
not taking advantage of transport, especially with in a locality, or even to Manchester,
Okay.
and billing for that.
You're back on the transport?
Yeah.
So we are absolutely, that conversation happens on a weekly basis, if not more
All right,
often.
well, who do we need to talk to? Because I'd like to be there to talk to them, to remind them of the expense that this is costing the taxpayers of Bennington.
And I'll agree with your point, but I think I still want to drive the conversation to patient choice and not.
That's fine.
That potentially is the outcome.
I think that is
but it's-
a reasonable thing to say, and you shouldn't cancel that out altogether.
Yeah.
But if there isn't any objection that they be transported by the Bennington Rescue Squad, we should take it and bill appropriately.
Oh,
If they
absolutely.
want to be transported by Manchester to and from, fine. Don't deny them that. But
And I think that's your message. I think that's the message, Jim. That's the message that we've been sort of sharing both with the powers that be at local medical facilities, that we're sharing with the public, we're sharing with you guys. That's our message. We want.
So how do we get it done? Plain and simple.
They've had this conversation on and on and on and on and on. So I actually personally don't know the solution. I don't know if you do.
Has anyone from the select
It's
board?
frustrating.
Has anyone from the select board been there, or any representative of the people of Bennington been there to press the case?
Not other than just our staff, no.
Well, I think I'd like to be there.
Okay. We can facilitate those, we can figure out a way to facilitate that meeting.
We'll have to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to be representing the select board without having a
No,
really intense
I think-
discussion.
no, I'd like-
So, we'll
I'd
be
like it to be more than
yeah.
just one person.
Yeah, because there are ways to present the issue to the powers that be, and they can be readily identified. But I think the select board has to direct it, not the individual members. So, but I understand your question, because it's a concern that we all have, and maybe we have to address it differently.
I think if we were to attack it this way, we could cure this quickly.
I would say quickly, I think it would help. I think it would, once again, I don't think there's ever a silver bullet. You know, the problem with public safety services, as Stu knows, is that, you know, when ambulances are moving, yes, that helps create the bottom line, or helps, you know, take care of the bottom line. But the problem is that there's an expectation that, you know, at 2 a.m., if there's not an ambulance moving, we're still paying for that, because you're expecting readiness. You know, you're having chest pain at home, you call 911. You want us to be out the door in 60 seconds to 120 seconds, and you want us at your doorstep in 6 to 9 minutes. And that's the expectation that we have to have. And to do that, you have to have folks here. And, you know, when we're moving the patients, it's going to help. But some of those expenses never go away if that's the level of, if that's what you want on the care side, or if that's what you want on the expectation side, is an ambulance in that time showing up with a professional crew ready to take care of you and or your family.
Do you think you could get these people that make this decision to come before the select board?
I don't know if I can speak to that or not.
No, I think we'd have to talk about that. And I think the presentation tonight with Bill, Forrest, and Brian, is that there are a lot of different parts to this puzzle.
Yes.
You know, the regulatory oversight, and the choice issues, and the financial ones, they all come together, and it's sort of something that has to be, will have to be addressed. How we play into that as representatives of the people who are paying part of the freight, and only part of it, is, I think, something that we as a select board should pursue.
Well, when do you think that
Well,
there would be
you
a
know,
reasonable time frame to do this?
It's not going to be next week, I can tell you. But it will be. I think it should be addressed.
I think you'll find it's complicated on their
Yeah.
side as well.
Yeah, exactly. Jean, Jean, yeah.
I will be very brief.
No?
On the second page of your letter, this is just a point of clarification too, are the community event coverage, are those free to the organizations, or?
It depends.
Okay.
So we use a combination of paid coverage. We use a combination of, I'll use the example of Garlic Fest. Garlic Fest does pay us a certain amount, but then you also see our branding on some of their stuff as well. So they might get a discounted rate
Okay.
because of the help and promotion of Bennington Rescue.
Okay.
Other things we will cover with duty crews, which means that they'll go up and maybe participate in something, but they might have to leave. And then with certain people, like the colleges, like if they want someone there for graduation, they absolutely have to pay.
Okay.
And that's a really great point. Is a lot of folks think at the end of the planning process, usually what, Bill, 3 to 4 weeks or 5 weeks from an event, or days, it's like, hey, we're having this huge party at Prospect, and, you know, we're going to have 5,000 people there. Maybe we should have an ambulance. So they just call and they say, hey, can we get an ambulance up there? And, you know, Bill puts the schedule out. The schedule for February comes out January 1st. So for us to plan for that, and it's not free. You know, usually these folks are on hourly or overtime. So, you know, we say, okay, this is X dollars per hour. They're like, what? We're like, well, you want a dedicated ambulance to sit at your event for X number of hours. There's a cost associated with it.
The other question I had on page 1, on the opposite side of summary budget comparison, there's community education, and that's an expensive, so can you just, I just need context on what exactly that is.
On the,
It's a $30,000 line item on page 1. It's right after your tax ID, then there's the budget summary
oh,
comparison.
you're
to the
back on your application. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So that's, it's community education that's costing you, I'm assuming it's staff hours.
Yes, I don't have it, I'm lost a little bit, but I can tell you where that is. It is offset in the income side.
Okay.
So it is all, we provide CPR education, that type
And
of
then
thing.
they pay.
Yes, and
Okay.
it's,
So I'm just going to dwell on the endowment piece for one more second. You're allowed to spend 7% of the endowment. If you didn't need to spend 7% of the endowment, you wouldn't spend 7% of the endowment, correct?
Well, you're not even, it's technically unrestricted, but if it were a true restricted endowment, there's a 7% cap.
Right, but whatever.
Right.
Just because you can spend it doesn't mean
You should.
you do. Right, okay, I just wanted to put that out there. You were talking about the 12-hour gaps where you're having a really hard time recruiting staff because you can't guarantee them hours. Are there overtime opportunities for your current staff? And is that more fiscally a better way to do it rather than hiring a person and having to pay benefits?
I'll let Bill answer that.
Currently, probably close to 50 to 60% of our full and part-time staff, all those that work 32, are scheduled for a normal 32 to 36 hours a week, work somewhere between 50 and 70 hours a week.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's part of where the issue is. I really don't
Okay.
want my crew members to burn out.
No.
And most of the paramedics it's really difficult, and that is part of that operations and wage increase that you see, is that we're trying to get more competitive with the Albany and Massachusetts markets. Compared to, they just put out a nationwide salary survey they do every year through a large EMS consulting firm. We were 5th percentile for Northern New England for paying our paramedics. We were 5th overall percentile. So we're trying to get up to the 25th percentile, which is still, doesn't make us competitive for the market, except for people that are looking for the unique experience of working in Bennington. We do have a training program that has a good reputation for new providers to come in and gain experience. It's trying to get those people to come here. Workforce development is something that we struggle with a lot. It's almost impossible to recruit someone from outside of the area. The wages are just, even though the cost of living here is less, people just look at that wage number and say, that is so much less than what I make right now. I'm not gonna move my job to the Bennington area because of that difference.
And the only other thing I'll say is, like any not-for-profit, fundraising is, everybody's got to do it. So are your efforts to fundraise ramping up, or do you have new ideas? Are there other ways you feel like you could?
We're always exploring new options. We did the Rescue Fest, and we did the annual appeal, which you guys should have all received letters, and thank you for those that have donated. We're always looking at other options, but it becomes a staffing, the efforts of getting some of that stuff out. So if we can find ways to find benefactors or get into bequests or whatever else, all of those are options that we're exploring. The annual appeal is going to continue as long as charitable donations still are a thing. If that, in the new tax plan, if that's still a thing.
Seriously.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I was just going to encourage you, there's people in town, not me, who are really, really knowledgeable in fundraising, and there's probably assistants out there, especially working with your board. Your board
Absolutely.
is your best fundraiser. Best
We
fundraiser.
have a couple folks that both work with the hospital, and we have some other, call them friends of the organization, that are fundraisers for other organizations not in the Bennington area,
Okay.
that provide us advice and counsel and guidance that we lean on pretty heavily.
And even with town funding, we went back out with an appeal because we didn't want to stop that. That was fairly new. Because while the insurance model worked, they didn't feel like it was needed to do fundraising for many years. And we're happy to see that, people understood the appeal, that we still needed money for capital expenditures. And so, that we had a slight decline, but it's still been okay.
It's just a really interesting dynamic because I consider you part of fire, police, and EMS, but you're over here, and it's a business. It's hard to sometimes remember that it's a really different organization.
Jim had a follow-up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. Yeah, does that?
I'm done,
Okay,
yeah.
good, thanks.
For us, about a year ago, I expressed some frustration about you not getting paid for some calls. And I congratulate you for adopting that new policy. And I wonder how that has been working out when you bill people who have otherwise shirked their responsibility. Has there been a positive response, or has it been generally spinning your wheels?
So the thing that we did implement was the agencies around, so ALS insurance for the agencies around us. So where we were providing ALS services for places like Pownell and Arlington, you have an advanced life, Bennington Rescue is an advanced life support provider, so I use ALS and BLS, basic life support. And also in New York, so Hoosick, Petersburg, Berlin, Pittstown, those agencies, when a patient's situation needs a higher level of care, and we have the resources available, we will provide them a paramedic to provide that care. We had a couple agencies that we had an actual payment agreement in there, or a contract, but after meeting with you guys last year, we also took a hard look at it, and our board took a hard look at it, where we said, that's not right. I mean, yes, we are ultimately here for the patient, but Bennington, Woodford, and Shasberry can't subsidize Pittstown's ALS needs. So we went out to all of those agencies, and all but one is still in draft language, but all of those agencies have all signed agreements with us now where they compensate us when we provide that service.
Excellent.
So,
And there was another concern that I had, and I'm so glad you adopted it, and I'm a little proud of myself.
But wasn't
Did
your
they-
question last year about them
Billing anybody.
billing for services
They
that
weren't.
weren't getting paid for?
It was actually related to both, but it was for services in town
Yeah.
specifically
For
for
non-transports.
repeat offenders. And I wonder if,
Repeat
what,
offenders.
well,
Yeah, I know what you
I
mean.
know,
So-
there are people that call for,
Let me answer that.
people that
Take a
call
taxi,
for,
yeah.
because they have a
So,
headache.
I'll let you do that.
Thanks. So we took that back to our board, and we had very long discussions both at our board. And in our analysis on the non-transport piece, so we're talking about those patients that call frequently and fall into that category of calling us all the time. And Jim's recommendation to us was to send them a bill. So we did dig into it in the billing side, and the process itself was going to add a lot of expense to start the billing process. And to use an analogy, it just didn't seem like that it was going to be beneficial for us.
But you didn't, so you're telling me you didn't try?
Correct. That was, go ahead.
I was going to say also, at the board level, we debated, it's Bennington Rescue Squad, not Bennington Ambulance Service. And a lot of those donors in many years that gave that accumulated $3 million did it for the good of the community, knowing that Bennington Rescue Squad could be called under any circumstances.
Well, you still bill for people that pay insurance, right?
Yes, we do.
So then,
But it's-
should it then
but
still
if
be
you
called the
start doing
Bennington
that,
Ambulance Billing Service?
you start getting way outside the norms for the industry. And we felt like it was really an issue for the towns, that the towns actually needed to discuss that very carefully, because they would get a lot of complaints from the population. And typically, the people that are making those calls actually had very little in the way of resources.
So again,
So if you look at the
part of the
part-
response is some counseling and some education. Some of it takes and most of it doesn't. So I realize that it's a cost benefit. Does it cost you more than the benefit? you know.
I think you have to ask that if you're budgeting a decrease of $160,000 in billing revenue, you know, you're budgeting a decrease of $160,000 and not billing people, you know, it's hard
Sure.
to accept that. But I'm not saying your board didn't look at it, and maybe it is the right call, but you know, as billing revenue drops off, you might you need to change your position on that, or
I would
I
say
agree.
that the public, the one thing I will share with you is that the folks that have these, keep in mind that what's our recourse? We don't have a recourse. So the folks that call us a lot, they typically don't have the means to pay a bill. So we can go through our entire billing collection, we're going to send them a total of 3 to 4 bills over 90 to 120 days. And then also send them collections, all right? So these folks aren't going to pay that bill, so now we've incurred that whole billing process. Now, you call me 4 times a week or 3 times a week, and now all of a sudden let's pretend you're at the end of that 180-day cycle. If you call us, we're still going to come. Like, it's not going to stop us from coming out there. So that cycle is not going to...
May I make a suggestion?
Yes.
I get your point about sending multiple bills without getting any response, and just the paperwork and having somebody stuffing those envelopes is of course expensive. But when you show up with a chit or a form and triplicate that says, this cost you $180, we expect payment in a week, I can almost bet you that those people are going to think twice when they call you again.
I think you can
And
send
it would be a
federal regs.
very low cost. What?
I think you have federal regs, and basically there's some EMTALA and a bunch of other federal.
Yeah, but
rules
is that
and
a
regs.
fact or is that speculation?
No, just the way you're explaining it, you're basically subjecting the rescue squad to risk.
So sort of, I think what Tom's referring to is sort of that if all of us decide to go up right now to the emergency department, they have to at least provide a medical screening exam and stabilization to anybody that walks in the door without their ability to pay.
Without asking them.
Without asking them. We sort of have that, because we're an emergency medical service, we don't fall under EMTALA, but there's other things that if you call for an emergency service, there are certain things that you expect. And that's one of them, that we're going to show up and provide a medical screening exam or transport to the hospital. That's where unlike the hospital, where if you call us, we have to take you. If you want to go to the hospital, we don't have the option, at least in Vermont yet, to say, no, your calf pain is not, that you don't need an ambulance. And that's the healthcare system is not there yet.
maybe we don't need to go too much further on this, but I do feel like it's maybe just worth asking, what that number is of sort of unpaid claims. And if you have a sense of, is it hundreds of thousands of dollars? Is it tens of thousands of dollars? Is it?
Under what? Give me the unpaid claims.
Sorry, services provided, but that you're not.
Repeat
billing.
offenders.
Compensated calls.
Uncompensated calls, yeah.
If you were going to put a number to it,
In some cases, you didn't provide, you went there and they
yes,
canceled.
there's not a charge system for it. You would probably, it's probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
So I guess what I'm getting at, if it's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars,
Sure.
and you have $160,000, billing revenue shortfall or decrease, and I don't know the answer to this, but might it make sense just to send out one bill or two bills? Maybe 20% of the people pay, or 50% of the people pay, or something. But if you're not sending out any bills to those people,
There's no consequence for them.
well, also, I'm not quite sure I buy the narrative that nobody will pay the bill, that everybody.
I'm sure there will be a few, I'm sure that
I think-
absolutely do.
I think there will be people in this community that pay their bills. I think, I don't know if it's 50% or whatever, but there must be some number, and it seems like you wouldn't know until you tried,
Sure.
billing those folks. But we're getting into, this
Yeah,
is your
because-
board's, I'm
because-
sorry.
Yeah, no,
It's their
yeah,
board's deal.
But it is,
Yeah.
and I think you've already made that present decision. Maybe the
Yeah.
impact of this
And
discussion will lead you
we
back
meet
to
again
it.
tomorrow night to actually
Yeah.
hopefully finalize our
Right.
budget, and we'll
Would you,
discuss it some more.
Forrest, would you revisit it? And with Donald's suggestion, even if you just send it out once,
But
and see what kind of
I'll
response
take it to my
you
board
get.
tomorrow, and Brian are here. We'll
You
talk.
got nothing to lose, really.
I do think that there is I think there's some PR and there's some things on the backside that you're going to hear. So I think both myself and you guys and Stu are going to hear from the folks that are getting those for, in their minds, keep in mind that if you call 911, we come to your house, and then they don't need us. So you're paying, you want me to charge for something I didn't use?
Yeah, and I get, you said this at the other meeting, I get that you don't want to create a disincentive for people who really need care. So if somebody is not sure if they need care and they might need care, you don't want them making a financial decision on that. You
Exactly.
want them making a care
I'd rather
decision.
you
I get
err on
that.
the side
I'm
of-
with you on that, totally. I'm just wondering if
It's a
there might be
follow-up,
some,
I do
if it's
think
more of
there's
a spectrum.
it's actually a complicated issue. He has broken it down to the different buckets for us before, and it's a wide variety in there. I do think we could look at the buckets and make some decisions on certain buckets. There's a whole range of what happened. Some people canceled before they even got there. Some people, they got there and refused to go. Some people got transport, but uncompensated. I mean, there's a whole range within that. So I think we could look at it and disaggregate it and make some decisions.
Well, I was just thinking that as we hopefully move towards a system where insurance is provided to all, and we can open that door to
Yeah, one would
the
hope.
insurer
Right.
being billed for those
Right.
non-compensating calls, then I think that answers that question.
Definitely.
Because they are absolutely right. There are probably many, many people in the community that simply don't have the dollars to pay. But if they have an insurance that allows them to be billed, then that issue perhaps gets much better for the squad.
Right, so it's in that category of things are changing rapidly.
Because
and- yeah.
you only get paid if you transport it at
Correct.
the time by insurers. So,
Unless there's other questions and comments that we haven't discussed, our policy usually is when we meet in January, we hear the presentations, and then we deliberate when it's time to make a decision across the spectrum. But with the squad coming into this discussion now, for basically the first time, what's our timeline as far as for us to basically make a decision on how we would like to?
well, I think the first decision that you need to make is that they're going to be a part of the budget.
Yeah.
And if that's a positive answer, then I think you have time to deliberate about whether or not you're going to approve this request and put it in the budget, or look for some reduced request, and discuss that kind of an issue with them at a later date.
Well,
I like that route.
yeah, is that fair to you? And the timeline is, I think, the only thing that would be important. I think, let's find out if we have a consensus. Do we want them as part of the budget? And do they want to be? Does the squad?
Would you like to,
Yeah.
straw poll?
Yeah.
I think they should be in the budget.
I do too.
Yeah.
What was the second alternative?
No.
Not
Yeah.
petition.
Not be in the budget.
And just
Well,
petition.
this year, they wouldn't be forced to petition because we said we're going to put people on the ballot as long as they weren't asking for an increase. So theoretically, they could say, look, we don't want to be in the budget this year because you're going to ask us to reduce our request, so put us on the ballot for the $207,460.
Yeah.
That would be part of your policy that you passed a couple
Yeah.
of weeks ago. If they want to be in the budget, then there is potentially a negotiation that could take place at one of our budget work sessions later.
I'll go with a consensus.
Thanks.
I do have one sort of caveat with that though, Tom, which is that, it would be great to have 2017 numbers. So, I look at this budget, I know it's not going to be easy, but it looks to me like you, as I say, if you followed your budget, you'd have a $62,000 surplus. And so that would affect me and how I felt like we should vote for this. So I'd love to know more about the 2017 numbers and what's happened to the endowment before we make the number decision.
Sure, absolutely, you need
Yeah.
information.
And frankly, I don't know how far you are in your policy statement, because
It's quick. I've shared with them what we use. You
Yeah,
could
yeah.
actually do it fairly quickly, but it
Yeah.
all depends on, is there regularity as to what the squad could count on in terms of town funding, or the policy is meaningless. because you're going to have to use it as you have to.
I hope it wouldn't be a chicken and the egg that we could say.
Yeah, yeah, it
So
could be.
There are joint efforts to make that happen. So I think the board would like to just see that policy, even if it's in if it's discussion stage. There might be a couple of other things, and I think I'd like to have that, here's a checklist of things if you get to us within the context of.
Well, our work sessions are tentatively scheduled for January 6th and the 13th, with the 20th held as a potential final meeting if we need it. So if that's a time frame in which you can gather some information from 2017.
The 6th would be really hard, it's impossible.
I would imagine the 6th would be really hard.
Yeah.
We usually end up taking the library on the second meeting. We generally deal with the municipal budget, and then we look into the agencies. So maybe the 13th might
The
be some time where
13th, I could probably have some preliminary stuff and.
Or even if it comes in drips and drabs, don't feel like you have to have it all at once. Just
Sure.
We should ask you, here's what we really need to basically pull this conversation together. So you don't.
It does feel like we need to let them know. I mean, we need to know that we can't give you a number right now, but you probably need to know a range, because if our range is too low for you, then you would want us to fire up the petition, right?
I think that's probably a discussion we're going to have at our board, yeah.
And so, I mean, it strikes me that, based on your numbers, that there is a number somewhere between 100,000 and the number you put out there that might be an appropriate number. That's my opinion. That after looking at these numbers pretty deeply. So I'm not saying that I will be supportive of the full $207,000, but I know I'll be supportive of at least $100,000 when the time comes. So that's to give you a sense of where I am, and I don't know where the rest of the board is, and if we probably preliminary talk about it, but I don't know how they can move forward.
They can't, because I think we have to give them the response and where we're coming from, because the request right now is for 207.
They could also petition and then pull it.
No.
No?
No, we haven't done that.
We did that last year.
Petitions,
Oh.
I don't think they'd be able to get the petitions in time. I mean, well,
January 30th?
maybe they could.
30th?
No, it's by the 20th. They have to be in by the 18th.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's too low.
But they don't need to petition.
No.
But I'm
They don't
saying
need
they
to
don't.
petition.
I mean, if.
Oh, right,
and that's
right,
why I
right,
say,
right.
if in our work sessions,
Yeah.
let's say the 13th, we have the information of how well they did in 17, and it's the board's decision to say, look, we're going to give you $150,000 this year, place you in the budget. They could always say, no, thank you, we're going to go on the ballot.
Right.
Because you've already offered that to them.
Yep.
That gives them that opportunity to say, all right, put us up
Yep.
on the ballot for this year. We're not willing to do that. Or they might come back and say, well, look, how about 170? I mean, then it becomes a negotiation
I see.
at that point.
They could ask us to put them on the ballot.
Yeah.
Yes.
And without-
Yeah.
and if we.
Right, without
a number, without saying our number.
Right.
Yeah.
And would that
This year, that'd be
negotiation take place during the
Yeah,
budget
because they don't
time?
have to do it.
Yeah, it would.
They can't ask for
Okay.
more.
Okay.
I mean, I would assume that, I mean, much as we do I'll use the Bennington Free Library, they come in for a request, and there have been years that we've said, no, we can't go that high. We'd like to pare that down. We'd like to bring that request back. We've in fact level funded them in years past, where they were asking for a 5 or 6% increase. So that is a negotiation.
Yeah, but the library could have said, we want you to put us on the ballot at what we want, and then the board would have to decide.
But we've never had that
I know,
conversation.
but I'm
because
just
the
saying,
Bennington Free Library
Squad
likes
could this year.
being in the budget.
Yeah.
Well, there are
Like
advantages to being in the
Yeah.
budget.
I think there's.
Yeah, it's clearly an advantage
It is.
to be in the
It's the way to
budget.
go.
Yeah, so we can more or less commit to either we, to you guys, either we come up with a number that you can live with, or we let them go on the ballot.
Right.
Okay.
Or
So-
we have to decide.
Yeah, we'll gather all the additional information.
Yeah.
I've got investment balance and 2017 investment results, draft policy and the spending policy, draft 2017 results. Is there anything else?
Not that I can think of.
Okay.
There is, it's a we won't get it for this year, but at some point, it would be nice to see the capital plan. So,
They've had them, we've had to throw them out the window.
yeah, I understand, but it'd be nice to see
But you also
about
wanted
when
the
the,
salaries, didn't you?
yeah.
The salaries. You wanted the salaries. Did you
Yes,
say?
I-
Yeah.
if you would include that in the, your information at budget time, the salaries for individuals.
Or just the higher
Ranges,
pay. Yeah,
what about ranges
yeah.
or something? Could we make it to,
Yeah, so that it doesn't have people attached to it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Why
the
can't we do that?
importance, right, I mean, what you want to know is, what's the range, what's the highest salary paid, what's the average, what's the lowest,
Well,
right?
here's the
No,
question.
Because,
that
I mean, otherwise, it's just personal information.
Well, right, but the question that I have is that, you know, we regularly vote on the salaries of town employees, our vice town manager, the town clerk.
Yeah, but they're not employees of the town.
Yeah.
That's the distinction, I think. And
If
I
it's
think a range
possible-
would be helpful.
If it's possible, you were saying if the information came out in dribs and drabs, I would rather hear a comprehensive
No, for
presentation.
us, then we get it, and then we say.
Oh, not their presentation
No,
would
no,
be in
no,
dribs and
yeah,
drabs.
we're-
Oh, okay.
It's a one,
Okay.
so that they're prepared, we're prepared.
Okay.
Yeah, good question. Does that work for you gentlemen? You know, if you understood what we're talking about, relative to, we would like to set you up into the session, and if during that time, we decide, say, the number's great on the ballot, it's going on the ballot anyway, or the number's something less, your request, whether or not the board would decide to put you on the ballot at that point. Because the board could say, and under a new policy, it automatically go on the ballot.
Yeah, this year,
Yeah,
I think.
which is good.
But you know, I think if the board finds common ground with the squad on
Oh,
that
yeah.
request, then it goes into the budget. They don't appear on the ballot.
Yeah,
It becomes
but-
part of
but
the
it'd be-
overall budget.
But it'll be a line item on the budget, but
Right.
still.
Right. Okay.
Is that-
That's good.
Yeah.
I'm all right with that, yeah.
I think the long-term solution is the squad should be part of the budget, frankly. is
Yeah, exactly, and it really is.
And the
It's-
long-term
it's-
solution is work out something on the endowment that everybody knows with transparency what we're doing and how we're budgeting for that.
That's right. It's all part of health, safety, and everything that we provide otherwise.
Here's a question I'd like to throw out, and Stu, maybe you could answer that. If we were to absorb the rescue squad again as part of our emergency services, would we then therefore inherit their $3 million endowment?
No.
Actually,
It's probably short.
if they were willing to become a town department, yes, we would inherit.
Yeah, but
I
they probably
don't
spend
think
it
that's-
before.
I
That's
don't
not
think
a bad
that's
idea.
solution. I don't think it's the solution.
They run pretty efficiently.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think
Yeah.
that from the
Well,
taxpayers.
we could keep you in your place.
It also feels to me like things are changing with the hospital, you
Yeah,
know?
that's
So
right.
I just wouldn't want to, you know, I wouldn't want to leave that out. Yeah, it feels to me very much like you could eventually end up partnering with our hospital in a very productive way.
Yeah.
So no need for us to absorb them right now, I would say.
I like that
Good
idea.
observation.
Except the endowment, we'll take that.
If not, we'll end that discussion. Thank you. Can we continue to use your good offices here for just, for? the
Absolutely, yeah.
Sure. Good. Thank you. Thanks very much,
Thank you
guys.
very much.
Very helpful. We have other business to come before us.
Joey's
Tonight.
gone.
So,
I have a
doesn't matter.
liquor license to circulate. This is at long last Miller's Toll. Former Pepper Mills is getting ready to open.
Great.
And so I will circulate the liquor license for your signatures.
All right. Very good. Other business from the town manager tonight?
Dan's got his hand up.
Dan would like a short executive session on a real estate matter that actually has really, in a sense, come to the fore in a pretty nice way, and we'd just like to bring you up to speed in what we're thinking and how we might approach it.
Very short. Very short. Okay. I haven't got anything other than that. Don?
I apologize for being so granular tonight.
You ought to.
Oh, I really appreciate it.
I'm gonna hear about it from Dan, I know.
Chad?
I'm all set.
Good. We
You
have
didn't
a
ask
need
me.
for, oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, jeez, I gave you my pen.
I feel rather happy that I ran my mouth less than Donald did tonight.
That's why I sit here.
Tell Meg I'm very sorry.
Okay.
Anybody want to sign a select board petition?
We have a need to go into executive session on a matter that, real estate, I'm sorry.
Real estate.
This is appropriate for the purposes of discussing a real estate matter that's not appropriate for public comment, is that right?
Advertising.
All in favor signify by aye.
Aye.
Everybody, we are now in executive session once everybody clears the room.